Hey everyone, before we get started today, make sure to hit that like button to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives. Now today we are diving headfirst into a system that you use pretty much every single day, but maybe don't fully understand, and that's the Indian banking system. So whether you're a UPSC aspirant getting ready for that economics section, or a student just starting out on your financial journey, or just someone who wants to be more financially literate, this deep dive is for you. Because trust me, understanding the flow of money in India can lead to some really interesting aha moments. And guiding us through this world of loans and ledgers is our expert today, who I have to say is amazing at breaking down even the most complex financial systems into stuff that we can all understand. So are you ready to decode the Indian banking system? Let's dive in. First things first, let's tackle the most basic question. What even is a bank?
Well, it's actually pretty fascinating. We use banks all the time, but they can still feel kind of mysterious. At its core, though, a bank is really an institution that has two main roles. On the one hand, it's like a safe place for your savings, it accepts deposits from people and businesses. But then on the other hand, it's this engine for economic growth because it takes that money and lends it out to people who need it.
So it's kind of like a financial matchmaker, pairing up the savers and the borrowers. But how does this matchmaking actually work? Is there like a secret recipe that keeps this whole system going?
Yeah, I guess you could say the secret ingredient is this like dance between deposit rates and lending rates. So when you put your money in a bank, they give you a percentage back on that money as interest. And that's your deposit rate. But then when the bank lends that money out, they charge a little bit higher interest rate to the borrower, and that's called the lending rate. And that difference between the two rates, that's how banks make a profit and, keep things running.
So it's this careful balancing act to make sure the depositors get a return, but at the same time make sure there's enough money out there to fuel economic activity.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, our source material dives into the different types of banks in India. And apparently it's not just one big system. What are the main types of banks out there?
You're right. It's a lot more diverse than most people think. It's kind of like a busy marketplace with different vendors, and each one specializes in something different. In India, we've got a bunch of different banks, and they cater to different needs and demographics. So we have four main players, and those are the public sector banks, the private sector banks, the foreign banks, and the regional rural banks. And each one has their own little quirks, I guess you could say, with different ownership structures and target audiences.
Ooh, a financial marketplace. I like that. So tell me, what's the deal with these public sector banks? Are they like those old, reliable general stores in this banking world? Yeah, in a way, I guess you could say that. Public sector banks, or PSBs for short, are mostly owned by the government. So think of institutions like the State Bank of India or Bank of Baroda. And their main mission is financial inclusion. They want to make sure that everyone from a small shopkeeper in a tiny town to a big entrepreneur in a big city has access to basic banking services. They're also a really big part of putting government schemes and initiatives into action, kind of like a bridge between the policies and the people.
So PSBs are all about making sure there's a solid foundation for the whole financial system. And they want to make sure that everyone has a place at the table. That's great. But what about these private sector banks? Where do they fit in?
Well, think of private sector banks as the more modern boutiques. Places like HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, or Axis Bank, those are majority owned by private companies. And they really prioritize the customer's experience, and they love coming up with new innovations. They tend to have more options when it comes to the products and services they offer. And they focus on making things fast and convenient and giving you solutions that really fit your specific needs.
Okay, so PSBs are the general stores, and private sector banks are like the trendy boutiques, each one catering to a different crowd. It really is starting to sound like a marketplace now. What about those foreign banks that we mentioned earlier? Do they add some international flavor to the mix?
Well, they totally do. They're kind of like the import shops. They bring global expertise and financial services to the Indian market. They usually work with people and businesses that have international financial needs, or those who just prefer working with an institution that has a global presence.
Okay, so we've got our solid foundation, the general stores. We've got our trendy boutiques, and now we've got our import shops. That leaves the regional rural banks. I'm guessing they're specifically for the rural regions?
Exactly, you got it. Regional rural banks, or RRBs, are like the farmers markets. They're deeply connected to those rural and agricultural communities. They help bridge the gap between traditional banking and those areas that haven't had as much access to banking services. So they offer credit and financial services that are designed for farmers, small businesses, and entrepreneurs in rural areas.
It's amazing how each bank has its own role. They all come together to make up this Indian financial system. But Wait a minute. I'm looking at this source material, and it looks like there are even more types of banks in India. We've got more than just these four. Are we about to find some hidden gems in this marketplace?
Haha, yeah, you've got a good eye. So those four are like the main players. But the Indian banking system has a few more tricks up its sleeve. We've also got cooperative banks and payment banks. And they each have their own special features, and they target specific groups of people. Think of them as the crash shops in our banking world, each one with a loyal following.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me about the cooperative banks. What makes them so special?
Well, cooperative banks operate on this idea of for the people, by the people. They're owned and managed by their members, and their members are also the customers. So it creates the sense of ownership in the community, and it lets them focus on specific needs. They often work with small borrowers, local businesses, and rural communities.
So it's like a community-driven banking model. Everybody chips in, and everybody benefits.
I like that. Now, what about payment banks? They sound like a pretty new addition to our marketplace.
You're right, they are pretty new. Payment banks are really driven by the rise in digital transactions and this push to make sure everyone has access to financial services. They focus on offering basic banking services, like savings accounts and electronic payments, and they're really great for people who might be new to using banks or those who prefer doing things digitally.
So they're like the tech-savvy startups of the banking world, making
Yeah.
banking easy and convenient for everybody, no matter their level of tech skills.
Exactly. And actually, to help visualize all of this source we're looking at has this really great table. It compares all these different types of banks. It's kind of like a map of the marketplace that highlights the main features of each bank and what makes them unique.
A map. Every explorer loves a good map. Let's use that table and do a quick recap of each bank type. Sounds good. Okay, starting with public sector banks, we see that their main focus is on financial inclusion and helping the government put its plans into action. They have a huge network of branches all over the country, and they offer a wide variety of services to all sorts of different people. And then we've got the private sector banks. They're focused on things like providing really good customer service, and they're always coming up with new and innovative ideas. They tend to have a wider range of products and services too, and they really prioritize making things fast and convenient for their customers with solutions that are tailored to individual needs.
Right. It's like we were saying earlier, they're the boutiques.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to foreign banks.
Okay, so foreign banks, they bring in their global expertise and specialized financial services to India. So they typically cater to individuals and businesses who have international financial needs, or, maybe they just prefer working with an institution that has that global reach.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, now what about regional rural banks?
So regional rural banks, or RRBs as they're often called, they're really focused on serving rural and agricultural communities. They act as a bridge between the traditional banking system and those underserved areas, providing credit and financial services specifically designed for farmers, small businesses, and rural entrepreneurs.
Okay, so we've got our public sector banks, our private sector banks, our foreign banks, and our regional rural banks. But we also have these other two categories.
Right, we've got cooperative banks and payment banks.
Okay, so cooperative banks, what are they all about?
Cooperative banks are really interesting. They operate on this principle of for the people, by the people. So they're owned and managed by their members, and their members are also their customers, which really fosters a sense of community ownership, and it allows them to focus on specific needs that might be overlooked by larger institutions. They often work with small borrowers, local businesses, and those in rural communities.
So it's like this community-driven banking system. That's pretty cool. Okay, now what about payment banks?
Payment banks are relatively new to the scene, and they're really driven by the rise of digital transactions and that push for financial inclusion. So their focus is on providing those essential banking services like savings accounts and making electronic payments. And they're especially beneficial for those who are new to formal banking or prefer to manage their finances digitally.
Got it. So they're kind of like those new tech-savvy startups in the banking world.
Exactly. They make banking more accessible and convenient for everyone.
That's awesome. So we've talked about all these different types of banks in India, but what do they actually do? Like, I know I use banks all the time. I deposit checks, I pay bills online. Heck, I even just check my balance from time to time, but I've never really thought about what's actually happening behind the scenes. So what are the core functions that all these banks perform, regardless of what type they are?
Well, it's easy to just take those everyday transactions for granted, but trust me, there's a lot more going on than you might think. Banks are like the gears that keep the entire financial system moving. Their main functions are all about managing money-making transactions easier and giving you a secure way to access and use your funds.
So it's not just about holding on to our money. It's also about making sure that money is actually circulating in the economy.
Precisely. One of the most important things banks do is channeling funds from people who have extra money to those who need it. Remember when we talked about deposit rates and lending rates? That's where this comes into play when you deposit your paycheck, for example. That money doesn't just sit there, it becomes part of this larger pool of funds that the bank can then lend out to individuals and businesses who need it.
So like my deposit could be helping someone buy a house or start a business or even just cover an unexpected bill. That's pretty cool to think about.
It really is. And that lending function is really the heart of economic growth. It allows businesses to invest and expand and create new jobs, and it helps individuals achieve their financial goals, whether it's buying a home or funding their education.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But banks do more than just take deposits and give out loans, right? There's got to be other things keeping them busy.
You're absolutely right. There's this whole network of services that they provide. Think about how often you transfer money. Maybe you're paying bills online or sending money to a friend or a family member or even just shopping online. Well, banks are the infrastructure that makes all of those transactions happen securely and without any hiccups.
So they're kind of like the financial plumbing of our modern lives.
Mhm.
You don't really think about those pipes until they stop working.
Haha, exactly. And another key function is issuing drafts, which are basically guaranteed payments for those larger transactions. It's useful when personal checks or cash aren't practical and gives you that extra layer of security when making a big purchase. And of course, we can't forget about those safe deposit lockers where you can keep all those important documents and valuables. So it's like having a physical safe for those things that you really need to protect.
Yeah, sometimes you need something more than just a digital vault. Now, speaking of international stuff, our source mentioned foreign exchange as one of the key functions of a bank.
Yeah, so banks play a crucial role in international trade and investment. Like, let's say a business needs to import goods from another country, or you want to send money to a family member overseas. Well, the banks are the ones who handle those tricky currency conversions and cross-border payments, making those transactions smoother and more efficient.
Wow, it's really starting to feel like banks are the central nervous system of the entire financial world, connecting all these different parts of the economy.
I love that analogy. And something important to remember is that all these functions, from taking deposits and making loans to handling payments and managing foreign exchange, all of that happens within a framework of rules and guidelines set by the Reserve Bank of India, or RBI.
Ah, yes, the RBI, like we mentioned earlier, they're like the conductor of this whole financial orchestra, making sure everyone's playing in sync.
Precisely. The RBI is India's central banking institution, and they're the ones responsible for keeping the entire financial system stable and running smoothly. So they set the rules, monitor the banks, and implement policies to keep everything in check.
It's amazing how all of these different parts work together. It's like we've zoomed out to see the whole picture, and now we can see how each piece fits. But how does all of this relate to us, the everyday people who use this system?
Well, that's where financial literacy comes in. The more you understand about how the banking system operates, the better equipped you are to make those smart financial decisions. It's all about being in control of your own financial well-being.
So it's not just about theoretical knowledge. It's about having those practical skills that can help us manage our money, make good choices, and actually reach our financial goals, whether we're saving for a down payment on a house, planning for retirement, or just trying to make our paychecks last longer. Understanding the banking system gives us a real advantage.
Absolutely. Think about it. You can choose the best bank account for your needs, understand interest rates and how they affect your savings and loans. You can even start to make sense of those economic news stories and trends that shape the financial world around us.
Wow, this deep dive is seriously changing the way I think about my own money. I'm seeing connections I never even noticed before, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn about this system.
You're right. We've laid a solid foundation by talking about the different types of banks and their core functions. But now let's move on to the world of those big banks that we mentioned earlier, those heavy hitters that really shape the Indian financial landscape.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Indian banking system. We've covered a lot of ground so far, talked about all the different types of banks out there
Yeah.
and all the important jobs they do, and even how the RBI kind of keeps everything running smoothly. But now I'm really excited for this part. It's time to talk about the big guys, the major players, those heavy hitters that have really shaped how finance works in India. You ready to explore the world of big banks?
Absolutely. These are the institutions that you hear about all the time, the ones whose decisions can really impact the whole economy. Their stories are really intertwined with India's economic journey from like the early days after independence all the way to, this digital revolution that's happening now.
Okay, I'm ready to hear all about it. Where do we even start with these giants?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the granddaddy of them all, the State Bank of India, or SBI for short. Imagine a bank with a history that goes back more than 200 years, with roots that are like woven into the very fabric of India's financial system. That's SBI.
Whoa, 200 years. That's older than a lot of countries.
Yeah.
So SBI is like the wise old tree of the banking world with branches that stretch to every corner of the country.
I like that image. As the biggest bank in India, when you look at their assets, SBI really represents that stability and reach of the public sector. It's a public sector bank, which means the government owns most of it, and they play a huge role in making sure everyone has access to financial services. They even reach those really remote parts of India.
That's incredible. SBI is like the bridge that connects millions of people to the formal financial system.
Okay.
Okay, but what about the private sector? Are there any private banks that have stepped up and become these big players?
For sure. Two names pop into my head right away: HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank. These guys have grown like crazy over the past few decades, and now they're powerhouses in the Indian financial world.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of those names, especially HDFC Bank. What's their secret?
Well, if SBI is the wise old tree, like we said, then HDFC Bank is like the bamboo that's growing super fast and adapting to everything around it. They've built a name for themselves by having amazing customer service, and they've been leading the way in this whole digital banking revolution.
So they're all about technology and making banking easier for everyone. That makes sense in today's world. Okay, so what about ICICI Bank? Where do they fit in?
ICICI Bank is like the strong oak tree, known for its strength and for offering a ton of different options. They have a huge range of financial products and services, so they work with everyone from regular people to massive companies. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for all your financial needs.
So we've got our wise old tree for stability and reach, our fast-growing bamboo for innovation and adapting to change, and our strong oak tree that offers all sorts of options and strength. It's really cool how these big banks show different sides of India's financial system. But it sounds like they all have one thing in common. They're all super important for helping the economy grow and connecting India to the global financial system.
Yeah, that's a great point. These institutions are basically the engines that power India's economic goals. They support everything from building new infrastructure to coming up with cool new technologies, and their impact is felt in every area, from agriculture and manufacturing to the tech industry, which is booming right now.
Wow, this has been a really interesting journey learning about all of this. We started with the basics, figuring out what a bank is and all the different types we have in India. Then we talked about all the things banks actually do, realizing they're not just places to keep your money, but they're like the heart of the economy, making sure money is flowing and things are growing. And then finally, we got to meet the big players, those big banks that are shaping finance in India and affecting the lives of millions of people.
And don't forget all that stuff we learned about financial literacy along the way. Understanding this whole system gives you the power to make good choices about your own finances. Whether you're saving for something big, planning for retirement, or just trying to manage your money better.
All right, that's what makes this deep dive so awesome. It's not just about learning new things. It's about giving people the tools and information to feel confident about their financial well-being.
Exactly. The Indian banking system is always changing. New technologies are popping up all the time, rules are being updated, and global trends are always influencing things. But everything we've talked about today gives you a solid foundation to understand this complex world.
I totally agree. A huge thank you to our expert for walking us through this fascinating world and explaining things so clearly. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Remember, the world of finance is full of amazing things to discover. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the knowledge that helps you understand the world better. If you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future adventures in knowledge. Until next time, stay curious.